I did already. I did two of the very indispensable things that you have to do in Philadelphia. I went to Mass. This is very good. And today I stood in front of the Rocky statue and did like this. I made a tweet. So yes. So welcome this evening. I thought I was going to tell you a bit about myself, how this book, The Habsburg Way, came about, why I've written this book, and why I think it is an important book for our time, or as Michael Knowles puts it in his endorsement, the single most important history book to appear in our troubled times. So I didn't say that, he said it. It also has an endorsement by Cardinal George Pell, who read this just before he died, but there's no connection. And Newt Gingrich also said a few nice things about it. So, I suggest I will tell you a bit about what this book is, why I write it, and a bit about myself, and why I think it's important that this book can make a splash. For those of you who haven't seen it, the foreword is by Viktor Orbán, our Hungarian Prime Minister. This gives me nods and smiles when I speak to an American conservative crowd. And in Germany or in Austria, it's like... It's so funny how different the world is. Okay. My name is Eduard Habsburg. I am Hungarian ambassador to the Holy See and the Order of Malta. Since 8 years, I'm holding on to my chair. The Hungarian government does not send me home. They seem to be happy with my work. It's extraordinarily exciting because I see what's going on around the Holy See in the church, close up with my feet on the court, basketball court. I'm that close. I see everything happening. It's very exciting. I'm married to a wonderful wife. Since 27 years, I have 6 children. When I say that in Europe, everybody says, oh! When I say it here in America, it's like, oh, perhaps the Lord will give you a few more. Really, yesterday evening I was invited to a dinner here, and I think 3 of the families had more than 9 children. So I was like, yeah. Yes, I'm from the Hungarian branch of the Habsburgs. If you want to know what that means, you have to read the book. I have, when people ask me, how are you related to Otto von Habsburg? Or is Blessed Emperor Karl an ancestor of yours? My answer usually is, I need a piece of paper and 20 minutes. So I decided to put it into that book so you can see how we're all related. We're from the Hungarian branch, that's why I'm the Hungarian ambassador. I have one brother who is a priest. My wife has one brother who is a priest. And one of my daughters got married a year ago, and in about 4 weeks I'll be grandfather. Then immediately I will have gray hair and walk like this. I have done many very different things. I'm going to give you a very short version of what I did before because it is not your typical diplomatic career. There's 2 seats here, free. 3 seats. Please come in front. So, after, please here, and there. Yes, thank you. After studying philosophy, and getting married and writing my thesis on Thomistic philosophy, I began to work for a television station in Germany as an editor. And after that, I went to an animated cartoon production company and produced animated cartoons. 2 TV series, and I was on 1 movie. I fell in love with animated cartoons, and I fell in love with script writing. So while we were dropping children left, right, and center, I became a script writer. And we moved from Cologne in Germany to Austria. And for the next years, I wrote screenplays and scripts. Among other I have one treatment for a really cool Austrian zombie movie that was never made. And then because I realized that I have to earn a bit more money if I want to keep my family surviving, because script writing does not make you rich, I decided to become a media spokesman for a Catholic bishop in Austria, because his diocese was very close to where we stayed. So I went there and he really took me in, and for 5 years I was spokesman of a pro-life bishop, of the bishop for bioethical questions in the Austrian Bishops' Conference, Klaus Küng. Also because he was someone who was not very comfortable in front of a camera and was not very relaxed with the media. He thought he needed someone who enjoyed that. So I did that for 5 years. And at the end of that, the Hungarian government came knocking and said, "You're Hungarian, could you imagine of becoming our Hungarian ambassador to the Holy See?" And I said, 3 reasons why I don't think I'm the right person. I've just written a zombie movie. I'm not a diplomat. I said, my Hungarian is really rough. I didn't speak it very well. And the 3rd reason I didn't give my idea of ambassador was something terribly boring. It was standing around at receptions with a glass of champagne in your hand, smile limpidly, and try not to say anything that could offend anybody. That was my idea of ambassador, which of course is as far away from the truth as possible. It's incredible. It's the most exciting job I've ever had in my life. And while in all my previous jobs, I could only bring a part of me into the job, now I can bring everything in, and that's fantastic. Especially my faith, that's wonderful. Because as I always say, I'm being paid for going to Mass. I'm one of the very few, because going to Mass is part of our everyday ambassador work, because you know, in other embassies you just make receptions for your national holiday, but at the Vatican, the embassy of Poland will not only make a reception, but always also a Mass with someone from the Vatican, and so you get paid to go to Mass. It's very nice. Yes, so and then they told me why they think I would be a good ambassador, and I said, okay, I'll go for it. We jumped, we went to Rome, and I'm there since 8 years. And doesn't mean that I don't continue to write. I'm very active on Twitter, far too active, my wife sometimes thinks, but it's all for the good cause. And from time to time I manage to write a short story, an article, or a book, like this one here. This gives you an idea. As a second thing, I would like to give you an idea what it is, how it is to grow up a Habsburg. Now, first of all, it's the only way of growing up I know, so for me it's the normal way. But you realize very soon when you're a Habsburg that you're not exactly like all the other people. And the first moment you realize this is very often in school. Because the Habsburgs from around 1273 to the end of the First World War were active and part of European history for about 650 years. That means that in school, when you have history class, the Habsburgs will be mentioned a lot. And what happens is that the teacher says, but that is something that Mr. Habsburg surely can tell us more about. And all the others in class turn around like this to you, and you get red in your face. Of course you don't know that, because I don't know who of you knows Dune. We are not like the Bene Gesserit. We don't have other memories. We cannot interiorly confer with our ancestors. We don't have that. We don't have collective memories. So yes, so that's how you grow up. You find out that you belong to something special and different, and then you say, well, I should find something out about my family, because next week he's going to ask again. So you go to your father, you go to your uncles, you begin to buy a book, you begin to read up about your family, and you discover it's quite a nice family. I mean, there are other families who have made massacres and conquered countries and destroyed things, and we mostly got married and had lots of children. And all of the Habsburgs were really Catholic, and that is a nice thing. It's really a nice thing. And that's one of the inspirational basis of this book. It's a nice family that can teach us a lot for every one of us today. That's the central thesis. Just a short introduction why this book came about. I didn't plan to write that. I never said all my life, I'll have to write a book about my family. I wrote other books, novels, and books about architecture and history, but I never wrote about the Habsburgs. And then a friend of mine, George Gunning, who is not here tonight, but is a great friend and also has his office here in the house, came up to me and said, why don't you write a book about the Habsburgs for the American audience and for Sophia Press? And funnily enough, I had an idea how to write a book, because I didn't want to write a history of the Habsburgs, because that exists over and over. So there are several good histories of. I said, I'll do something else. And the idea of what I would do came by a talk I gave in Boston in a club a year ago. I was invited by a friend to give a club talk about my family. So I said, okay, I'll do that. But he said, be careful, not all of them are Catholic, so you cannot just talk about Blessed Karl and faith and the Habsburg faith. And I said, yeah, okay, so what's the other things the Habsburgs stand for? What are our principles? My idea was I'll give them a few points that they can take home and say, well, okay, I learned something, yeah. So then I began making lists, and I looked through books, and I called uncles and aunts. I said, what are our central, our principles? What do we stand for? And that was really quite interesting, because I realized that this list had never been made before. There were, I mean, if I ask you, what is the first thing that springs to mind when you think about the Habsburgs, except on Twitter when they all say Habsburg jaw, because they know that the Habsburgs had these lower lips, in the Spanish line in the 16th century. But most people will at once say Catholic royal imperial family, and they will say lots of children and marriage, politics, and all that. So, I had my first 2 points, marriage, and so my first point is get married and have lots of children. And the second one is, of course, be Catholic and live your faith. I don't have to be careful here not to hurt people who are not Catholic, so I can be very direct. Yes, but I looked for other points, and I came up with a list of 7, and that's how this book is built. And while doing this, I discovered 2 very exciting things. First of all, that these 7 points that the Habsburgs stood for are things that seem to have slightly been forgotten nowadays, slightly missing from our everyday life, and that seem to be something that would be worth rediscovering. That was one thing. The other thing that surprised me far more is how very close the principles of the Habsburg Empire, the principles of the Habsburgs, and the United States are. Now, you wouldn't think that. You probably would. But most people would say, Habsburgs, that's tyrants and despots, that's kings, and the states are built on the basis of fighting tyrants and kings and building a democracy from the ground. But I discovered that there are a few things that are very, very close. And that's when I found out that it was a good idea to write such a book for the American public, because I would have an audience that would understand me. In fact, I am very nervous about when this is going to be published in Germany and in Austria, because this is really written for the American market, with Americans in mind. And yes, and I think you will discover, leafing through the book, that a lot of the things, although I speak about events of the last 600 years in Europe from a royal family, will speak to your heart. I think it will. Good. This is sort of a general introduction. I will dive in and give you 2 or 3 points, and then perhaps 1, 2, 3 stories that really, for me, I'm going to read you the list of the 7 points. That is quite useful. And my idea is that these principles are for each and every one of us. They're also for our society in general. As I say, it's gone. Most of this is gone. And especially for our politicians. I believe that our political leaders have lost a lot of credibility, especially in the last 3 years, and that people don't trust the political leaders anymore, while as they did trust the Habsburg political leaders over many centuries. And I give some reasons why this is the case and why it's not the case anymore nowadays. And talking about this, I will talk about Blessed Emperor Karl, who is a great example for all of this. So, get married and have lots of children. My personal experience in my life, I have 6 children and a wonderful wife, is get married if you find the right partner. And as I said in an interview a few days ago, the right partner is not the most attractive or the most sexy or the richest. It's the one that shares your values and has the same outlook on your life, the same ideas on family, and will stick with you under the eyes of God. And have lots of children. The greatest gift you can do to each other, to yourself, and especially to the children, is a big family. And this, I can experience this every time we sit around the table, and I see what we have done by bringing all these people into the world. And even if you're not Catholic, even if you don't believe in God and you don't believe that you should multiply, for the state it makes sense. The Hungarian government has a reason why they encourage people to have more children. In our government, we have strong financial and other helps for families, because we believe that if you are born into a numerous family, you will learn all the virtues that you need to build a just and loving state. Our society will be better if people have more children. I strongly believe this, because I learned it around the dinner table. Your children learn all the virtues you need. Solidarity, love, respect, looking out for the weakest, learning from each other. You learn all of this around the dinner table. Watching your children, how they interact, it's a miracle. So, get married and have lots of children. And of course the Habsburgs did get married, did have lots of children. Some of them up to 16. I'll talk about that later. Be Catholic and practice your faith. I have 2 chapters on that. Because while the Habsburgs are synonymous with Catholic, like one could almost say, is the Pope Catholic? And you can say that about the Habsburgs. I know there's always some worried faces when I say that. But what I'm saying, yes, I won't say more. But they were Catholic, but they had their ups and downs. And you can, reading these 2 chapters, you will see that they had times where I just can't imagine how it must have been to have lived under such an emperor in Austria, like Leopold I, where the entire court followed the emperor, who began his days by hearing 3 masses and reading along in the liturgy books. And then having all those devotions, all those feast days, and the whole of Vienna always was there, and all the diplomats were there. And the entire population took part in this. But the emperor and his family showed the way. And the French ambassador to the court of Leopold I once complained in a letter, I will try to do this with a French accent. He wrote home and he said, "Between Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday, I was kneeling at least 100 hours." So nowadays, for a political leader to be devout, it is enough to have been baptized. But at that time, devout really meant devout. But that was the great examples. But the Habsburgs had a few rulers who were really problematic. And unfortunately, those rulers who were weak sauce with Catholic faith were exactly in the time of the Reformation. When Reformation crashed into Europe, the Habsburg emperors became more cloudy and wobbly. But because we are family, this was a time when a few of their siblings, nephews and nieces rose up to greatness and really saved the Catholic faith in Austria. I'll give you one example now. One of my favorite Habsburgs. She's called Magdalena. I wrote an article about her in First Things, and I wrote about her in this book too. You can Google my article in First Things. It's a cool story. Now, she was a daughter of Emperor Ferdinand I. Ferdinand I lived at the same time. He was the brother of Charles V. So we're talking 15, 30, 40, 50, that time. And she was one of his, I think, 16 children too. And she was beautiful. And when she was young, she was painted by Arcimboldo, by the famous artists. And that picture, you can find it online. So she came to her father with two sisters and said, we want to become nuns and found a monastery. Her father said, no way, no way. I want to marry you off to the Prince of Gonzaga. No way, you're not going to do this. Your youngest sister, she's weak, she can become a nun, but you, I'll marry you off. So they tried again and again, and she had a very strong ally. She had Saint Peter Canisius, the famous Jesuit saint, who was her confessor. So she tried again and again, and finally the father said, okay, you can found a monastery. So she founded a monastery in Hall in Tyrol, in Austria, and was very happy, and lots of vocations. It was all wonderful. But and then she began, when the Council of Trent had happened, she began to distribute writings in Tyrol and the neighboring Austrian lands in order to fight the ideas of Protestantism from a monastery. That is quite cool already, but her shining moment came a bit later. In 1579, the nuncio of the Pope arrived in Austria and wanted to convince the Habsburgs to begin counter-reformation and fight the increasing influence of Protestantism. But he knew that he couldn't go to the emperor, because the emperor was Ferdinand II, and Ferdinand II had the Luther Bible on his night desk. And that was a bit difficult. So he went to her monastery. And she invited him in, they talked, and then she brought him together with two of her brothers who were the archdukes of the other parts of Austria, her sister who was married. There is one seat here in front if you want to. And one here. There's two seats. Please sit down. Her sister was married to the Duke of Bavaria, and together they made a meeting in Munich, so-called Münchner Abkommen they made, and that was a meeting where two Habsburg archdukes, the Duke of Bavaria and the nuncio of the Pope, made a clandestine meeting, and they wrote a bucket list how to take back Austria for the Catholic faith. It's a wonderful read. But she made that. Without her, it wouldn't have happened. So that's great. That's great. Yeah, and so that's one of my favorite Habsburgs, Magdalena. And of course we had ups and downs. As I said, you will find all of this in the book in all detail. And of course, the greatest shining light of Catholic faith in our family was Blessed Emperor Karl, the last emperor who, in the eyes of the world, was a loser, because he took over after nearly 70 years of Franz Joseph during the First World War in 1916, and he was emperor for less than 2 years, and he lost the empire, the war, tried twice to go back into Hungary to reclaim his crown. It still was his, didn't manage twice, went into exile and died from an illness very shortly after. So a real loser in the eyes of the world, but the greatest hero of faith in our family. And really, the Habsburgs began really well in 1270. Before he became emperor, the first Habsburg who became an emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Rudolf, who was a count in Switzerland, he made a grand gesture. And that grand gesture, I think, opened the door for our Catholic way. When he was still count, he was hunting in the forests of Switzerland, and he came to a swollen river, and there was a priest with the viatic trying to bring the sacrament to a dying man, and he couldn't cross the river because there was too much water. And Rudolf got off his horse, gave him the horse, and said, "You take my horse and you bring the viatic to this dying man." So he was very thankful. He rode off, and then he came back, and he wanted to bring the horse back to Rudolf. And Rudolf said the lines, "Far be it from me that a horse that has carried my lord shall carry me again. Keep this horse." And the people in the area said, this gesture, God will give the family blessing for this. And if you look at how the family history happened after that, and that story was famous at the time, that's not a legend from later. And we were blessed. We were really blessed by God. And the last emperor of the Habsburgs was the greatest shining light in the family. And I have to say that between 1800 and 2000 around, for 200 years, we had no priestly vocation in the family. We had dozens and dozens and dozens of young men, and not all of them became emperor, but none of them became a priest. So you see that the Habsburgs also, after the time of the Enlightenment, we went through a valley. The first priest in the Habsburg family after 200 years is my brother. And now we have 3. So things are looking up. So that's the faith topic. Another topic that is really important, and for me, probably one of the key messages of this book, is the little word subsidiarity. And it's a word that, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, is incredibly important in our times now, especially now, because subsidiarity is the ultimate antidote and antithesis to globalism. Subsidiarity is the principle that says that the lower level should do what the lower level can do, and the higher level should not interfere, and the higher level should be weaker, and the lower level should be stronger, because we are human beings. We're built for the local level. We're built for the family. We're built for the township. We're built like the United States, see? Built up from the grassroots up, from the family, the township, the county, the state. The federal level should really be the softest and weakest level. It's a bit different nowadays, but in theory, if you read Tocqueville, this is how it should be. Because it is, we are built that way. We are built for local level. It's also very rational, because the local level usually knows best. Now, for the Habsburg Empire, that meant that if you ruled over several countries as an emperor, and you always did, you had to respect every single one of these countries. You couldn't love one more than the other. You had to respect their language, their habits, their rights, their legal structures, their diets, their parliaments. You had to respect all of that, or you were in deep trouble. That's what Charles V in 1550 wrote to his son. He said, you have to do this. You have to respect every single one of the countries that you rule over. You cannot gloss over that. And most of all, you cannot do everything from a central point. You have to respect how they do things. And whenever the Habsburgs, in those hundreds of years, did something different and tried to centralize the power in one place, introduce one language for everybody, and force measures onto the single countries from a central point, it always went wrong. It always went wrong. 2 big examples were Joseph II, who was so in love with the ideas of Enlightenment and of what the Prussians did in Prussia. Frederick II was his great idol. Joseph II was the son of the famous Empress Maria Theresia with 16 children. Joseph II thought he would turn Austria, Hungary, Bohemia, and the neighboring countries into a really well-functioning, well-organized, centralized state. Everybody would speak German, and you don't need parliaments in the single other countries. You don't need institutions. We'll all do this in Vienna. It's one empire. And what he did is he went to Hungary and to Bohemia. He took the crowns out of the countries, brought them to Vienna and locked them into the Schatzkammer in Vienna. That, of course, led to incredible unrest and protests, and he was in real trouble. He was only emperor for 10 years, but he nearly destroyed the empire by doing this. And of course, his brother, when he became emperor, when Joseph died, he became emperor only for 2 years. He immediately turned down some of these measures because he understood that the Austro-Hungarian Empire was an empire of many different parts that had to be respected. The United States are, in theory, United States. You are a union of different states, And in the last 3 years, you could tell that some states took the liberty to do things differently than the federal land that was planned, because you're still states with their own rights. That is why many people in Europe look to America as a place of hope. You have all the ingredients to be a shining light for the world in these times. And as we live in a time where we have the feeling that political decisions are being made far above our level, and we all have this feeling sometimes that the politicians we vote for, the politicians we elect in our democratic elections, are not really the people calling the shots, that there are international organizations, cross-nation organizations that really call the shots. Certain institutions like World Economic Forum or other things, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist here, but you have the impression that sometimes decisions are being taken so far above the national level that democracy is going down the drains, because you vote for politicians, but if they have no say at all in anything, what do you vote for? And this is globalism. This is the danger of decisions being made on global levels without ever taking into consideration the lower level. Do you see what I mean? That's exactly why I think that the basic idea of the Habsburg Empire and the United States, but also our time, this is very important and very fresh. In one point of my book, in that chapter at the end, I say, if a very high level of organization tries to impose measures onto you in the name of an idea or of the latest scientific fad, like Joseph II, this may be a case of enlightened absolutism, like Joseph II. Resist. I say resist. You are not subjects nowadays. You're free citizens. The state exists because of you. So that's, I think, a very fresh message of the Habsburg heritage, and perhaps an answer to some of the questions we have today. I will also say stand for law and justice. We seem to imagine that rulers and emperors were mostly tyrants, but most rulers were rulers on the basis that they respected the law. They were the most respected judge in the country. The Holy Roman Emperor, while having very little power and had to juggle all these different states, was the highest judge. And many of the Habsburg emperors were great lawgivers and were great lawyers themselves and stood for their subjects. They really stood for their subjects. They did what they could to help their people. Know who you are, that's about tradition and your roots and where you come from. We live in a time where technocracy and the powers that be try to convince you that you are A, alone, B, without family, C, without surrounding, D, in front of a screen all the time, and you can change who you are every 5 minutes. That's not true. That's simply not true. The Habsburgs were very traditional in their opinions, and I write about that in my book. I write about be brave in battle. That's one chapter where I write about those Habsburgs that were active on the battlefield and showed how courageous they were. There is a few shining examples. Habsburgs were present at two key moments of European history: at the Battle of Lepanto, Juan de Austria, a Habsburg of the Spanish line of the Habsburgs, and of course, not physically present as a general, but having organized everything, Leopold I in 1683, when Vienna was liberated from the Ottoman Empire and the Ottomans were pushed back out of the heart of Europe. And the most important chapter is the last one. It's called Die Well and Have a Memorable Funeral. And not all of us need to have a memorable funeral. But while I was writing this book, I watched, I think, probably half of humanity. I watched the funeral of Queen Elizabeth, and there was a very touching moment when the coffin with the Queen slowly was lowered into the crypt, and the Master of Ceremonies was reading the titles of the Queen, and the music played. There was one trumpet, I think, played a beautiful salute, and I was very touching. But I just said, the Habsburgs did it better. I'll tell you why. Judge, when I'm finished, you will agree with me. I have been twice present at the so-called Habsburg knocking ritual. At 2 funerals of 2 Habsburgs that died in the 20th and 21st century, we could still experience this very old ritual of the Habsburgs. And it's really, really cool. So the coffin arrives at the door that leads down to the Capuciner crypt in Vienna. That's a crypt under the Capuchin church in the center of Vienna. It was a huge crowd of people, and the master of ceremony knocks 3 times at the door. And you can see, watch it on YouTube. There is a film, and the voice of the Capuchin monk from inside says, "Who is there?" And he says, "Zita, Empress of Austria, Queen of Hungary, Queen of Bohemia, Princess of blah blah," and then all the titles down, half a minute of titles. And the monk answers, "We don't know her." And then he knocks again, and then he says, "Who is there?" And then lists up all the achievements of the emperor, all the battles he fought, all the peaces he won, all the marriages everything. "We don't know her." And then he knocks a 3rd time, and he says, "Who is there?" And they say, "Zita, a poor sinner." And then the door opens. Why is this so important, and why is this so typical for the Habsburgs? Because the Habsburg emperors knew 2 things. They knew that their personal eternal life depended on the way they died. They prayed for a good death all their life. They prepared everything to be in the state of grace when they died. They went to confession regularly. Even Joseph II, who made a terrible mess of things and closed down half of the monasteries in Austria in his ideas, because he said it's useless, they just pray. They don't do anything useful. He closed every single contemplative monastery in Austria. And there were 2,000 monasteries in the Austrian lands. Now we have maximum 180 religious communities. There were 2,000, and he shut down half of them because they're not useful. Even this Joseph II, when his death came, his confessor was there, and he made a confession, and he was ready. But what I was saying is the Habsburgs, on one hand, they knew that my personal life, death, my eternal life depends on how I die, whether I prepare for my death, whether I'm ready, and whether people pray for me. This is one side. The other side is that all Habsburg emperors knew that my death will be watched. My death is a public affair, and my subjects will take their ideas from how to die as a Catholic from me. So I better die well. And my funeral better be a sermon to the people watching it. And that was one of the cases, was this ritual. Everybody understood that. It's very clear. The emperor is a poor sinner. Okay, I'll tell you about another of my favorite Habsburgs. Maximilian I, not the one that was killed in Mexico, but Maximilian I, who lived in the 15th century. He is called the Last Knight. A fantastic, larger-than-life character. Young, extremely good-looking, very sportive, very strong, great, shooting well, fighting well. He fought with sword in saddle in tournaments at a time when the time of the knights was long over. That's why they called him the Last Knight. He was chivalrous, he wrote poems, he wrote autobiographies, he was friends with Albrecht Dürer. He was a great guy. And he fought for and he won the most beautiful and richest princess of his time in a fairy tale that you have to read in the book, because it's really... It's the greatest romance in the Habsburg history. It's the story of Maximilian and Mary of Burgundy. You have to read it. It's wonderful. But Maximilian was also a devout man. And although when he was a bit older, had for a short time the plan to become Pope himself, I think out of political reasons and grandiosity, but he gave it up. It was just an idea. He was part of a rosary fraternity and very strongly encouraged people to pray the rosary. And when he came to his death, he made 3 testamentary arrangements that are so brilliant and grandiose, especially because you can still see all 3 of them today. And that makes my point again, the responsibility of a political leader to show his subjects how through his life, how you live well and how you die well. Maximilian died, and three things were done. The first thing, he ordered his body to be shorn, his hair to be shorn, his dead body, to be flayed like our Lord, and to be put on a bier like that, in that state, and to make a painting of that. It was to be sent in all parts of the empire to say, the emperor is a poor sinner and not better than you. That is strong. I've stood in front of one of those paintings in Eggenburg in Austria. That was the first gesture. The second gesture, absolutely wonderful. If you go in Innsbruck, into the dome of Innsbruck, the church, the cathedral, and there is this famous funeral monument to Maximilian. But more important than that, in the right-hand side there's a chapel. And in that chapel, you will find kneeling an armor, a knightly armor, the favorite knightly armor of Maximilian. His testament said that his armor should be in kneeling position with hands folded in front of a Blessed Sacrament for all eternity, to show people what devotion is, even if it's just his armor. Can you imagine putting your favorite armor in a church so people go there and are struck by this image and think about devotion? 2. 3, he ordered his body to be not put into a splendid tomb, but to be interred under the stairs leading up to the altar in Wiener Neustadt. And I was there this winter, the first time, to see this. You go into the church, it's a beautiful old church from the 16th century, of course, when he lived, and you come to the old, there's nothing there, you don't see anything. Then you go up the steps to the high altar, and on the second step, you just have the words Maximilian on the step. This is where his coffin has been put in, because he wanted to be laid under the altar so the priest will say Mass above him and pray for him. Can you imagine what faith, and also what grandiose ideas, and how much he wanted to preach to his subjects about his faith by these things. So yes, I could talk about so many things, but I will finish with the example of Blessed Emperor Karl. Blessed Emperor Karl, when he was in exile in Madeira with his family, one day he walked and he looked over to the church of Nostra Senora del Monte, where he's buried now. And his wife walked beside him, and she heard as he stopped, and he closed his eyes and he stood. And then he said, yes, I will do it. And afterwards, a few days later, she asked him, what did you talk about then? And he said to her, I have offered my life to God so that my people can have peace. And a few weeks later, he got this bronchitis-like cold, and then he lay for weeks and died very slowly and with lots of pain. And all the time he was dying, he said, I must suffer so much so that my people can have peace. And he prayed for his people all the time. He had the Blessed Sacrament in the room beside. He always looked at it. And then at one point, because he had lots of pain and lots of difficulty in breathing, he said to his wife, if I wouldn't have the adoration and the devotion to the Blessed Sacred Heart, I couldn't stand this. But so it's easy, he said. And then he died offering up his life for his people. Why do I tell you this story? Because of course you should read the little booklet, The Death of an Emperor, that you can find online. It's fantastic, very moving. But mostly because we have grown used to political leaders being political leaders for a while, and then after having worked for the state, finding a plum job somewhere in business, earning lots of money, and having a very nice life with no more responsibility for their country. It's something normal nowadays. This was a luxury the rulers of the past didn't have. If you become an emperor, you are in it for life like your father was and like your son will be. Sorry, I'm including girls and mothers too, of course. Because what you do will have consequences for the rest of your life. You can never get out of it and say, I go into private business or something like that. And your son will have to live with the mistakes you made. which will always give you a different viewpoint from a politician who is probably tempted to say, for me the most important thing is the next election. And if I have election in 2 years, which kind of headline will hurt me more? My decision is not what is best for my country. My decision is which kind of headlines will make sure that I will be re-elected. And that's not always the best for the country. So what I'm trying to say is, can you think of a politician that you know that is ready to give his life for his country? Not on a battlefield, but to God? I don't know. I hope we have people like this. That's why I'm trying to inspire also, and to inspire you to ask this of your politicians. Ask of your politicians to be family people. Ask of your politicians to have a faith and to speak about their faith. We've grown used to thinking that if I'm a politician, it's the best is if I'm neutral, that nobody knows what I believe in, because then I will probably get more voters. In Europe, this is totally normal. You never meet politicians who speak about their faith. My prime minister is a great difference. He's a very outspoken Christian, and our president too, and a few, very few ones, but of most politicians I would not know of what faith they are. In the States, this is different. You have very clearly Christian politicians here. God bless you for it. But if a politician has a faith, then you can hold him or her accountable to that faith. You know for which virtues and for which ideas he or she is going to stand. And also, if someone really is a believer, then this someone thinks that what I do as a politician, I will one day have to hold in front of God, and God will hold me accountable. And this, in my book, lowers the possibility of corruption and doing terrible things. So you should ask for politicians of that kind. Faith, family. In Europe, we don't have a prime minister that seems to have a family. If they're not a gay couple anyway, they don't have children, they don't have grandchildren. You never see them with family. So people in the country will never see family. In the Habsburg lands, you always saw the emperor with lots of children. In our lands, you never see political leaders with children. In Hungary, you do. Yeah. Just showing off with my country. Yeah. So this is some of the, I think I've given you an idea about what I'm trying to do with this book, why I think it's useful to read it. Don't worry, I haven't told you all the nice stories. It's not all the spoilers that you have in there. Yes, that's why I would suggest that you read it. Also because you will learn, I have an opening chapter where I give you the Habsburg history. Just, the 5 most important dates that you have to keep in mind to be competent about Habsburg history. And yes, I have a few quotes from Star Wars, a few from Dune. Yes, I would say that's the most important things. I will finish with 2 questions before I give over to you for questions, because I think that's an important part. 2 things I like to explain. One of them is it Habsburg with a B or Habsburg with a P? Now I would like to ask you, can I have a raise of hand? Do you write Habsburg with a B as B or with a P as B? Habsburg. Okay, can I have a sign of hand for Habsburg with a P? Yes. Habsburg with a B. Okay, very good. Okay, this is one of the situations where you both win. That's why I did this. So, when I got onto Twitter and began speaking about the topic of the Habsburgs, I was very intolerant to people who wrote Habsburg with a P. Because we write our family the Habsburg way with 2 B's. However, this is the way our family has been written in the German-speaking world. And therefore we believe it's the right way because, of course, the Habsburgs lived in the German-speaking world. However, after I had for the first or second time told some people off on Twitter not to write it with a P, I wasn't diplomat at that time. A friend of mine who is a linguist and of history of languages very cautiously informed me that the writing with a P exists in the English language at least since the 17th century. So it is really well established. P is the writing that the habitual writing in the English language. And I've learned humility and acceptance, and especially because after that he sent me an article that seems to prove that the earliest writing of our family name in Switzerland in the 11th century was with a P in the middle. So I'm very humble now. The other thing is this thing I'm wearing here. I'm quite proud of it. This is the Order of the Golden Fleece. Golden Fleece was an order that came to the Habsburgs through marriage, and through marriage of Emperor Maximilian, larger-than-life Maximilian, because he married the Princess of Burgundy, and through marrying her, she was the only heiress, and the father had died. He also got this knightly order into our family, and since then, the Habsburgs and the Golden Fleece are basically intertwined. Whenever you see in a portrait gallery an image of a person from the 16th, 17th, 18th century, they are wearing a decoration of a hanging golden sheepskin, like this. They're almost certainly either a Habsburg or a close ally of the Habsburgs that has received this golden fleece. This is really cool. And nowadays the order consists of about 50, no, never more than 50. And we are actually 42 right now. And up until the end of the monarchy, all Habsburgs, male Habsburgs, received the order automatically at their 18th birthday. That's not like that anymore. You only received this order if you really did something for the head of the family, if you're really in his confidence and helped him very strongly. I'm one of the about 10 or 12 of the family that is part of the Order of the Golden Fleece, and that's really, really nice. And I'm one of the very, very few members of the Order of the Golden Fleece who regularly does not only get to wear this little buttonhole decoration, but the nice big one, because as diplomat and ambassador to the Holy See, to the Vatican, our official working outfit is a white tie with decorations. And with a white tie, I'm allowed to wear the big hanging golden sheep like this, and it looks spectacular. I remember one or two Vatican cardinals, when I came for the first time like this, bowing, saying, "What is this?" Because they didn't know, because you don't often meet the Golden Fleece walking around, because most people are never walking around in white tie with decoration. So that's really cool. And once in a year we meet on the Feast of St. Andrew, 29th, 30th of November? Yes. And we have two holy masses, and we wear the really big decoration, not the one here, but there is one with a golden chain, big like this. They are in safes. They get them out before Mass, and they take them away immediately afterwards. And that is really big. So it's a knightly order from Burgundy in the 14th century, and still around in the Habsburg family. You can read all about that in the chapter on Know Who You Are in Tradition. Okay, I think I've said everything I wanted to say. Thank you for your interest. Nobody fell asleep. That is a very good sign. And now I would be very happy to take your questions. Feel free to ask. And yes, thank you.
Thank you.